The pilot episode of ThunderCats was originally written so that multiple main characters simply didn't survive, and the people who had the authority to change that did, deliberately, for a reason they never put in writing. The production notes are real, the censorship decisions are documented, and today you're going to see exactly what they suppressed, what they changed, and what those choices cost the story you actually watched. Jaga wasn't meant to become a glowing spirit guide. He was meant to be gone, permanently, sacrificed, finished. And he wasn't alone. Several characters you saw in later seasons were written to die during the escape from Thundera. But the most revealing suppression of all, the one that tells you exactly what kind of show the networks were afraid to let exist, that's something we're going to walk through in detail. If this kind of excavation, the scenes they rewrote, the deaths they buried, the censorship decisions that rewired what this show was supposed to be about, is your thing, then subscribing means you get the next one the day it drops, instead of waiting for the algorithm to catch up. So, what did they decide you weren't allowed to see?
Hey, that's something! Doesn't really look like me!
What the show really was. To a network executive in 1985, ThunderCats was an easy pitch. Humanoid cat warriors, a magic sword, a villainous mummy sorcerer with real menace. Strong visual hook, obvious merchandise potential, no apparent problems. You put it on Saturday morning, you let the toy licensing do the rest. Parents saw the bright colors and heroic poses and made exactly the judgment the packaging was designed to produce. Safe entertainment, an hour where they didn't need to supervise closely. The show ran for 4 seasons and 130 episodes. It sold action figures by the millions. It became one of the defining animated properties of the mid-80s, sitting alongside He-Man and G.I. Joe as the kind of show that shaped a generation's visual imagination. From the network side, it looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, which is precisely how the sleight of hand worked. What the creators actually built. What the writers originally built was considerably more serious. The pilot episode, Exodus, was conceived as a story about irreversible loss. A civilization actually destroyed, with casualties that stayed dead. Jaga, the elder mentor who pilots the flagship to Third Earth, was written to expend his life force completely in that act. Not weakened, not spiritually elevated, gone. And Jaga wasn't the only one. Characters who would later appear in the series, Linkso, Pumira, Bengali, were conceptualized in early production as casualties of either Thundera's destruction or the journey itself. The original intent was a survival story in the truest sense, a remnant of a people who lost almost everything, carrying genuine, irreplaceable grief forward as fuel. The stakes weren't manufactured theater. They were built into the premise from the first page of the first draft. There is a specific phrase buried in the production record of this show. 2 words that tell you everything about how the networks processed the original script. We'll get to it. The device that changed everything. Somewhere between that original vision and Saturday morning broadcast, the deaths became suspensions. The grief became something manageable, recoverable. Suspended animation is a remarkable phrase when you sit with it. It means the loss is preserved in amber, available for reversal whenever the story needs reinforcements. It converts tragedy into inventory. Network standards for children's programming in the mid-80s were rigid on one point. Permanent death was considered too psychologically difficult for young audiences. Characters could be captured, weakened, put in peril, but the idea that they were simply gone, that the world didn't restore itself, was treated as something to be avoided at considerable editorial cost. The result was a show that looked like it was about the cost of survival, while quietly ensuring that survival never actually cost anything permanent. The darker ThunderCats, the one the writers started building, got softened before it ever reached a single living room. And the censorship decisions that followed, scene by scene, tell you exactly where the lines were drawn.
This decade from tomorrow.
The moments. Moment 1. Chains on screen. In this episode, the broadcast version included imagery of ThunderCats and other beings held captive, restrained, and forced into labor. The chains were visible. The servitude was depicted. It made it to American airwaves. For UK broadcasts, those frames were specifically targeted. Imagery depicting explicit restraint, the chains, the physical subjugation, the fact of being held against your will was cut or softened. British censors found it too intense for young audiences. and the editorial scissors came out. Here's what's worth noticing. The US version, which we typically assume is the more sanitized product, actually retained more darkness than its UK counterpart. The image of heroes stripped of agency, reduced to labor, held in chains, that carries weight beyond a standard fight scene. It's not a punch that can be dodged. It's a sustained condition of helplessness. What did that communicate to a child watching? Not excitement in the conventional sense. Something closer to dread, the kind that follows you out of the living room. The British censors understood that. They removed it specifically because it worked.
And I will obey. Mamba.
Moment 2. The cut that reveals everything. In Return of the Driller, Lion-O sustains a visible cut on his arm. Unusually for the series, the cut remained in the US broadcast. Not just the scene, but the blood consequence. The UK version removed frames showing blood and reduced the visual intensity of the injury. The cut stayed in the action. The evidence of harm was excised. This is a small edit, but it's philosophically precise. A cut without blood is a performance of danger. A cut with blood is actual danger. A body that can be harmed. A hero who is not invincible. The UK censors understood exactly what they were removing. Not violence itself, but the idea that violence registers. That it leaves marks. That consequences are real rather than implied and erasable. Ask yourself, how many times did you watch these characters take hits and never see evidence that it mattered? How many battles ended with everyone upright, unscathed, moving on? The edits weren't about shielding you from violence. They were about shielding you from the concept that a hero's body is fragile, that damage accumulates, that survival has a physical cost.
Oh, Jugger, look out the window, Lion-O.
Moment 3. What Saturday Morning Allowed. Mum-Ra attempts to drain Lion-O's youth, and the sequence that aired in the US showed it in remarkable detail. Lion-O visibly aging, his body deteriorating from a young warrior into an elderly figure on the edge of death. Wrinkles deepening, movement slowing, the vitality draining in real time across a sequence that had no equivalent elsewhere in the run. This one made the US broadcast largely intact, which makes it one of the most extraordinary things the show ever put on a Saturday morning. Rapid aging as a death mechanism is a specific kind of horror. It's not a fight. It's not an explosion. It's the body failing. Time weaponized. Youth stripped away in seconds. For a child watching a heroic figure they identified with, seeing that figure wither into frailty registered on a different frequency entirely. It was existential in a way a sword fight simply isn't. Some international versions edited the sequence for intensity. The US audience got the full deterioration. That choice reveals where the American censorship line actually sat. Not at darkness itself, but at specific categories of darkness. A body aging into death was permissible. A body held in chains was less certain. Blood on a cut was a judgment call. The distinctions are revealing once you look at them together. Moment 4. What decay looks like. Mum-Ra drains the life force from Mandora and others, causing visible physical deterioration, rapid aging, withering, explicit on-screen decay. The US broadcast retained the full sequence. Physical deterioration as a villainous weapon sits closer to horror than adventure. The body breaking down is not something a child's action figure line is built to accommodate. It's not a removable cape or a swappable head. It's the actual form of the character eroding, in real time, on screen. What the scene was showing was not defeat in the conventional sense. It was decay. The fact that it passed through the network review process and landed in living rooms on a Saturday morning tells you something about what the show was capable of when the editorial oversight was inconsistently applied. In stricter markets, imagery like this was removed. In the US, it aired complete. The cumulative effect of these 4 moments, seen together, is the texture of what the show was actually building toward. A world where consequences registered, where bodies could break, where survival wasn't guaranteed. The censors didn't catch all of it. Some of it got through.
Men are innocent. We can't fight them either.
Anchor moment. The pilot they rewrote. Remember that phrase I mentioned earlier? The 2 words buried in the production record? Here it is. Suspended animation. That phrase was the solution the network reached for when they encountered the original script, and understanding what it replaced changes the architecture of the entire show. What American audiences saw in Exodus was a harrowing but survivable escape. Thundera was destroyed, but the main cast made it. Jaga piloted the ship, weakened, and transitioned into a spiritual presence who could be called upon when the heroes needed guidance. Linkso, Pumira, Bengali, and others were placed in suspended animation, bodies preserved for later recovery. The losses were theoretically reversible. The original production intent was categorically different. Jaga was meant to die, not weaken and transcend, to expend his life force entirely and be gone. No spiritual apparitions, no glowing elder available in a crisis. A mentor who made the sacrifice and wasn't coming back, and he was not alone. Linkso, Pumira, Bengali, characters the audience would eventually welcome as returning heroes, were originally conceptualized as casualties. They were meant to represent the full cost of Thundera's destruction. Not people preserved for later use, but people who didn't make it. The escape was supposed to be devastating in the way actual catastrophes are. Most people got out, some didn't, including some who mattered deeply. Consider what that changes. In the broadcast version, the ThunderCats arrive on Third Earth carrying the burden of their planet's loss, but their mentors can still guide them, their allies can still return, and the grief stays largely abstract. In the original version, the burden is specific and permanent. Jaga is dead. These specific people are dead. The cost has names and faces attached to it. That specificity is what grief actually is. It's the difference between many were lost and Jaga didn't make it. One is history. The other is loss that stays with you. Suspended animation converts tragedy into inventory. But ask yourself what the show was really teaching when it made that choice. What does a child learn about loss when every loss is technically reversible? What does sacrifice mean when the person who made it can still appear to offer guidance in a crisis? The weight dissolves. The permanence evaporates. The original pilot was built around irreversible consequence. 2 words replaced that with recoverable consequence. Small phrase to swap into a script. The difference in what the story means is not small at all.
I did not. I did it because...
What it means now. The censorship decisions made around ThunderCats weren't unusual for the era. But they're unusually instructive because the gap between original intent and broadcast is so clearly documented. This wasn't ambient softening. It was a specific choice made at the level of the premise itself to convert a story about irreversible loss into one about manageable adversity. What does knowing that change? It changes the architecture of the whole show. Every time Jaga's spirit appeared to guide Lion-O, that was a scene that wasn't supposed to be possible. The mentor was gone, and Lion-O was supposed to carry that weight alone. The uncertainty, the absence of a safety net, the full weight of being the last line of defense for a people who had already lost almost everything. That version of ThunderCats exists in the production notes, not in the broadcast. It also tells you something precise about how the mid-80s understood children and difficulty. The era operated on a specific theory that young audiences needed protection from irreversible outcomes, that genuine loss was too much to put in front of them, that the hero's journey required a restoration clause. It wasn't cruelty. It was a coherent philosophy, one that traded narrative depth for emotional safety, consistently, across the entire Saturday morning landscape. What leaked through anyway? The irony is that the scenes which made it through anyway, Lion-O aging into near death, characters visibly withering, the chains at Castle Plundar, the blood on the cut, suggest the show kept pushing against the boundaries it was given. The darkness leaked through in the places where the censors weren't looking as closely, or where the threshold was inconsistently applied. What those scenes accomplished was the very thing the editorial decisions were designed to prevent. They made the world feel real. They gave the action genuine stakes, the heroism actual weight. They reminded viewers that consequences existed and survival wasn't guaranteed. A show about survival where nobody permanently leaves isn't really a show about survival.
Oh, Jaga, look out the window, Lion-O.
The version that made it to air was compelling, beloved, genuinely well-crafted. The version it was supposed to be might have hit harder and stayed longer in memory, something that asked more of its audience, and in doing so, meant more. The censors made their choice. The writers pushed back where they could. And somewhere in the gap between those two forces, the show you actually remember was made. The pilot of ThunderCats was written as a story where the escape from Thundera left real, permanent marks, where Jaga was gone, where specific people didn't make it, where the heroes arrived on Third Earth already carrying grief that couldn't be walked back. What aired was something different. Survivable, recoverable, built for a Saturday morning when nobody was supposed to feel too much weight. Suspended animation. 2 words. The whole philosophy of an era in 4 syllables. They decided to protect you from that darker version. Whether that made the show better or worse, whether it was improved by those softened edges or diminished by them, that's the question worth sitting with. Which of these moments hit you hardest as a kid? The aging sequence? The chains at Castle Plundar? Or the realization that Jaga was never supposed to be a ghost, he was just supposed to be gone? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what this generation actually absorbed from all those Saturday mornings. Thunder, thunder, thunder. ThunderCats, out.